Ooh, spooky. Yes, it is the day after Halloween, and I think it's fair to say that I, for one, didn't really go in for Halloween very much this year. That's not me trying to be a killjoy. It's really just saying that, look, this year, wearing a mask and eating candy constantly doesn't really feel like a special occasion. That's just, Tuesdays. Hello there, Pickles, and welcome to episode 47 of the Knitting Vicariously podcast. My name's Caroline. I'm found more commonly across Instagram and Ravelry as Dunderknit. I am a knitter living in South London, and if this is your first time visiting here on the podcast, a couple of things I'm going to call out for you. The first of those is this is me returning after a rather extended hiatus, so I'm going to be quite garbled and unpracticed and generally a bit word vomity, more so than usual, in fact. And so just to be aware of that when you're, perusing, maybe watch a different episode first. I won't judge you. The other thing, though, that you need to be aware of is that this is a swearing-friendly podcast, and that in amongst all of the other word vomit, there are the occasional curse words. Nothing hugely flamboyant, but, enough to potentially unsettle you if that's not your thing. And if it's not, I completely understand. This will not be the podcast for you, sadly, but there are plenty of other podcasts out there for you to enjoy. Good news all round. For those of you for whom this is fairly standard fare, or indeed those of you returning, thank you so much for bearing with me. I really appreciate you coming back to the podcast once again, and I really do hope that you're all well. Yes, indeed, we've just had Halloween here in the UK. Well, I mean, to be fair, we've just had Halloween, everywhere. That's how days work. But yes, nevertheless, as you'll see, yeah, it feels like fairly standard day-to-day fare now going forward. That's not wishing to sound too morbid, but obviously across the world, the various different lockdowns and restrictions continue. We here in London are kind of on the cusp of a few different things. We had a period of relative kind of freedom and definitely not normality, but kind of increased going out and meeting with people indoors, outdoors, wherever you could, obviously with still the fair degree of social distancing and so on. At the moment, London is currently sitting within Tier 2, which is very much a made-up thing that politicians have decided. Still means that kids can go to schools and that a lot of the kind of key workplaces are still open. You're encouraged to work from home wherever you can, which I am now doing, and you're also looking at avoiding public transport as best you can too. Pubs, bars, restaurants are still open but with a curfew, but it does mean that you're restricted to only socialising with households that you're part of indoors and up to 6 people outdoors, again with the distancing imposed. So yeah, it's a bit of a funny mix-up sort of time. All across the UK there are different types of measures. It looks likely that we're going to be heading into another lockdown at some point soon, and obviously I know that circumstances differ all over the world, but wherever you are and whatever you're doing, I really do hope that you're staying safe and healthy and well and just doing the best that you can with the hand that we've all been dealt right now, because I know it's been a pretty rough few months for pretty much everyone. Thank you so much to everybody who reached out in the meantime with thoughts and good wishes and comments. I really do appreciate it. As you can see, I am now in a slightly different location. Well, I mean, really all you can see is the stash wall, but the fact that the stash wall and the camera and me were slightly more intimate than usual, this is because I have moved house. Yes, indeed. For those of you who saw the video I put up just before I went off on hiatus, I have moved from West London to South London. I am now settled. I've been here about 2 months now. And yeah, all in all, things went fairly smoothly, or at least as smoothly as they could under the circumstances. So The only thing that I'm struggling with at the moment is the setup, because this is quite a narrow room, and so to get the yarn wall in here I wanted to try it out just this once, but I'm not completely sure this is going to work for us going forward. We'll try it and see how we go. There is another part of the flat that I'm probably going to try and record in going forward. The only reason I'm not there right this second is because I'm in on the ground floor of a beautiful house, and as part of that, the area that I would look to film in normally is an extension, and it has windows directly out to the sky, and as part of that, obviously there's quite a lot of noise, ambient noise, and it's currently, to use the technical term, fucking it down. It is absolutely pouring with rain, as it is often wont to towards the end of October and early November here in our part of the world. So it does mean I decided to try and come in here and podcast a little bit more quiet, a little bit less ambient noise, but a little bit more up close and personal. So we'll try this for a bit and we'll see how we go. But bear with me just while I get the setup settled, so to speak. Bringing things back to the core podcast then, I had actually intended to film this episode last weekend, but I realised halfway through the day that two fairly crucial bits of kit, namely this tripod and this light, they were in different parts of London from where I was at that point in time, which was not ideal, as I suspect you may realise. So instead I took the opportunity to hunker down, catch up with a bit of knitting, a project that I'll show you in a short while, and took a picture, posted it on Instagram, and just dipped my toe gently by testing the water and saying, would anyone be interested in the return of a certain make-along? And funnily enough, the answer was a fairly resounding yes. And so the Blame Dunderknit along will be making a comeback for its third year. For those of you who are new to the podcast, who haven't heard of this before, the Blame Dunderknit along is a make-along that seeks to kind of unleash your creativity, bring you joy at a time of year when obligations and shoulds are at their peak. When we come up to the holiday season, generally it tends to feel as though there's a lot of obligation flying around, whether it be gift knitting, whether it be reduced time for yourself, more time spent on other people. And the purpose of the Blame Dunderknit along was always about just revoking any kind of accountability and really just passing that blame onto someone else and using that as an opportunity to really just invite a bit of joy and fun in the projects that you work on. So whether that is giving yourself the leeway to go and cast on something new, whether it is inviting the opportunity to go and purchase some yarn from a yarn dyer that you've been looking at for a long time, if it is kind of picking up a whip that you've wanted to work on for a long time, but you were sort of otherwise engaged on a few other things. It doesn't matter what it is. It doesn't have to be knitting related. It can be sewing, it can be crocheting, it can be embroidery, it can be pretty much anything you like, as long as it brings you joy and it's something that you perhaps otherwise might not have got to. I am here for it. I will take that accountability. It is on me. You can use my name in vain to the absolute hilt. And I just want to see you just really knitting and casting on and crocheting and crafting all the things with our customary wild abandon. I would be delighted by that. With the Blame Dunderknit along, you can make as many things as your little heart desires. You don't have to finish them. This is not about working on a specific pattern or with a specific set of yarn. You can work on whatever you like with whatever you like, and if you get it finished, then that's great. If you don't, then that's fine. Again, the obligation and the kind of potential stress that comes with putting those pressures on yourself is very much not what this is about at all. One of the extra perks of the Blame Dunderknit along is that I try to offer out a couple of prize packages. In the past, we've had a few different ways to engage with the make along and ways in which you could win prizes, and this year is no exception. However, we are doing things a tiny bit differently this year. Whereas in the past, we've had 3 different ways in which you can win a prize. This time round, there will be 2 different ways in which you can win a prize, but 2 people will win a prize in each way. Does that make sense? I'm going to go with no. What I mean by that is there will be 2 ways in which you can win a prize, but each of those ways will have 2 winners. 4 opportunities to win a prize. Does that make sense? Maybe. Let me just go into detail. So, the first of those is Instagram. Those of you who are on Instagram will be aware that we've had the Blame Dunderknit Along hashtag for the last couple of years, and we will be resurrecting it. I will include it here on the screen now for you to see and enjoy. There is one thing I want to draw your attention to with this hashtag, and that is to say you will see that I have capitalized some of the letters in here. Thank you so much to Claire over on Instagram who made me aware of this by saying that by having all lowercase letters within a hashtag, it's sometimes very difficult for screen readers to be able to make sense of the hashtag there. So if we can capitalize some of the letters, so in this case the B for blame, the D for Dunderknit, and the A for along, then that means that folks with screen readers should be able to engage with it too. So I encourage you, wherever you can, please ensure that those letters are capitalized. Thank you so much. But yes, by using the Blame Dunderknit Along hashtag to show any part of your project, whether it be the yarn that you're casting on, the pattern that you're keen to start using, obviously protect people's intellectual property, don't go showing off graphs and so on if it's a paid for pattern. We can have in-flight project pictures, we can have completed project pictures. If you get there, then that's wonderful. Anything related to your Blame Dunderknit Along projects, please do feel free to use the hashtag. And what I'll do is at the end of the cal, I will ensure that I go through and do a bit of random number generating on the projects that have been started and tagged since the 1st of November this year. I'll pick one at random and there will be a prize package that goes out to that individual. As with previous years, the prize package is one that I'm going to curate over the next few weeks, so keep an eye out for that and I will come back to you once I've got a little bit more up my sleeve. Is that a phrase that we can use? A little bit more up my sleeve. I will show you what I've got up my sleeve. That suggests I have something up my sleeve. Oh, good Lord, I'm so sorry. The second way in which you can take part in our Blame Dunderknit Along is through Ravelry. So again, I know that there have been some improvements in this space and that people who previously weren't able to use the site are finding it a little bit easier for them. And I do know that for some folks it is still the main way in which they engage with knitters and general crafters from the world over. So I want to ensure that you do still have a space there to chat about and showcase your different projects. But I'm probably not going to have the same amount of focus that I have done in previous years. In previous years, we've had both an FO thread for your finished objects and a chatter thread. This year, it is only going to be a chatter thread. There will be no FO thread. And so as part of that, you can go in there and you can just go nuts. Absolutely back and forth with ideas, with options, combinations. What about this pattern for this yarn? Do we think it might work? Is there any modifications anyone would suggest? You chat your little socks off, people, because again, I'll be using random number generator with anybody who's posted in that thread, whether it be pictures of updates, whether it be encouragement to other folks and how they're getting on with their projects, anything you like. Obviously, please do keep it on topic. We've talked in the past that, you know, if you're generally discussing what types of cheese you're going to have over the festive season, less helpful. If you can keep it on topic to the cal itself, then that would be super. But to be honest, go in there and the more you chat and encourage and engage with other folks from the knitting community who are also taking part in the knit along, the more opportunity you have to win a prize package. So yes, I'll be opening up that chatter thread and essentially just chat your little socks off for the next few months. So you literally heard it here first. You may have seen it written down first somewhere else, but you've probably heard it here first, I think, probably, unless someone else has told you. I am talking about it here first. There we go. That'll work, I think. Unless you count the like 7 takes that I've had to do of this whole video. Oh, good Lord, stop. So there you have it. The Blame Dunderknit Along is back. It is back from now, the 1st of November, through to January the 31st, 2021. And I really, really cannot wait to see the things that you're going to work on over the next few months. This is one of my favourite things to do. As with previous Blame Dunderknit Alongs, I will ensure that I'm handpicking a few projects for each episode just to help you, again, really feel a little bit energized by some of the things other people are working on, enjoy the chance to knit vicariously, hence the whole branding, naming thing, and just generally feel enabled, because that is a large part of what I'm about. Slight change of scenery for this part here. Couple of reasons for that. The first of those is that my main battery ran out. And so I'm actually using a different camera. I know. It's just so professional, right? Apologies for that. But yes, I'm also in a different part of the house at the moment. It has stopped raining, which is delightful. And so I'm able to come from you. I think this may be where I set up going forward. There's just a little bit more room for manoeuvring in general, kind of showing off jumpers, which is what we'll be doing shortly. But yeah, as I say, this camera, it's a little bit closer, so it doesn't work so well in the tiny room of stash. It works a little bit better out here. So hopefully we can cut this in and it's going to be seamless, if only for my garbled explanation of the whole thing. More importantly, however, let's get on to what it is that I'm wearing, because in the many weeks that I've been away, I have managed to pull my finger out and sort out a finished object. Yes, indeed. Those of you who saw the previous episode will spot this. And indeed, I've talked about it and at least wanting to do it for quite some time. This is my Morning in Engelberg sweater. It's a pattern by Nadia Kretenda-Shen. I will include her pattern picture up now on the screen so you can see it in its full glory. But yes, this is a beautiful sweater pattern. It's also the second time that I have knit said sweater pattern. This is my green version. I also have another version in what some people would very unkindly call brown, which I of course refer to as a lovely deep bronzy gold toffee sort of colourway. Because, you know, gold. But yes, I decided quite a long time ago that I really wanted one of these in green, and I did make quite a few modifications to it. So let me stand up, let me give you a very quick show of this sweater, and then we can chat through some of the things that I changed. Yes, here you have it. This is my Morning in Engelberg sweater Mark II. This is, as you can see, a lovely, very slightly oversized, but only very slightly sweater. It hits me bang on mid-hip, and with this camera angle, you can actually see that it hits me bang on mid-hip. And yeah, it has this beautiful garter stitch panel down the front, and most prominently, this wonderful rope braid cable up the side here. I have a crew neck, which I'll tell you a little bit more about in a second, full length sleeves, and this fabulous green yarn is yarn that was in my stash. It is by Madeline Tosh. It is their Super Soft DK, which was a limited edition yarn, but I believe the colourway is possibly still available. This is the Viridian colourway. It is, as you can see, a beautiful, fairly deep emerald green, and I love it very dearly. But just back onto this pattern for a second. So as you can see, I've got the garter stitch panel running down the front, and indeed a slip stitch down the side seam there, and again garter stitch on the back. It is just the loveliest, coziest. I think this might be my favourite sweater that I've knit to date. It's not, you know, the most complicated sweater, but it is the one that I just gravitate towards. Everything from the kind of shape to the fit to some of the finishing that I did, I'm really happy with. In terms of some of the details that I want to draw your attention to, the first thing that I changed, and I mentioned this on the previous episode of the podcast, was I decided that I wanted to change the neckline. I have a deep love for folded neck bands, and so what I did was I cast on as normal, just with a standard long tail cast on. I knit double the length of ribbing that I wanted, and then folded it back on itself, and then this first row around the neckband where it is knitting, after the knit one purl one that you do for the neckband itself. I knit through both the stitch that's on the needle and the corresponding cast on stitch. So you fold it over, you knit through one stitch, you knit through the other stitch and then back out, and then you take both these stitches off the needles again, you go to the next stitch, you knit through the stitch on the needle, the corresponding stitch at the start of the ribbing, and again lift those both off. So that gives you this lovely sort of squishy folded over neckband, and because I'd done it on the neckband, I also ended up doing it on the hem, as you can see, and similarly on the cuffs. So yeah, lovely squishy finishing all round. Other than that, no real modifications made to this one. It is really just as the pattern is written. I have not yet blocked this sweater. It is basically blocking by being on my person. And so as such, yeah, I'm pretty happy with it. That's pretty much the extent of the modifications that I made to this sweater. It is a very, very well written pattern. It's lovely to follow. I knit the size 44 inches, which gives me pretty much bang on zero ease around my widest part on my bust. Oversharing on the internet, why not? But yes, it's fitting really, really nicely. I have not blocked it yet, largely because I was just too excited and giddy to get it about my person. I like to think I'm doing some kind of ongoing blocking as I wear it that little bit more. But yes, I love this sweater. It's so beautifully cozy. In terms of needle sizes, I did use the recommended needle size. I believe I used a 4.5mm for all of the ribbing and then a 5mm for the main body itself. It is garter stitch and it's knit in the round, so obviously you're knitting one row, purling the next as you go. But even so, it was actually really lovely and relaxing, and you've always got this lovely big cable here to keep your interest focused. For those of you who've been around for a while and have also seen the gold version of this sweater, that is how I'm going to refer to it. You'll know that I love this sweater very dearly. My only challenge with it was the neckline, which on the original one that I knit was a little bit wide. It almost acts as a sort of pseudo boat neck. So it sits quite widely out on my shoulders, but this I'm really, really enjoying with the sort of slightly closer knit neckline, and it's just making me very happy right now. So next up, I will tell you about some of my works in progress. It's fair to say I have been a little scatterbrained over the last few months. I think like many people, just with everything that's been going on, it's been quite nice to be able to chop and change and move around between different projects. But there are a couple that have caught and kept my attention. The first pattern that I've been working on is a beautiful sweater pattern. Spoiler alert, they are both sweater patterns, not even sorry, by the wonderful Melody Hoffman, who is Bee Mandarines over on Instagram on Ravelry and has her own Bee Mandarines website as well. The sweater is beautiful. It's called Tulip, and she published it on her Instagram feed and I instantly fell in love. It's a really nice, quite simple, straightforward knit, but exactly what my mind and my just kind of general spirit needed at that point in time. It's a raglan jumper with long sleeves, but the main detail that really kind of draws the eye is this beautiful scalloped hem around the bottom of the sweater. And I decided I needed it in my life. I'd actually been thinking about for quite a long time the yarn that I've used for this. And it's fair to say I'm knitting this at a slightly different gauge because this is yarn that's been sitting in my stash for a little while now. This is Tosh Merino DK in the Kenobi colorway. I'll hold up here for you to see. And what you should be able to see on the camera there is it is kind of predominantly grey, but it's got this kind of slight mint. I know, danger, bear with me. It's got this slight kind of mint quality to it as well. It's almost like it's kind of grey over dyed on this lovely kind of mint green base. And it's a colourway that I believe Amy Florence of the excellent Stranded podcast knit a sweater in last year sometime, I think. Can I remember for the life of me which sweater she knit? No. But there will be those of you out there who have the way and the means and the knowledge to go and check that out. It was a sweater, it was a colourway that's been in my stash for quite some time, and as I say, I was super excited and kind of keen to find something to knit with this. My first thought was another pattern that I actually knit using this yarn, because apparently I'm in the state of mind where all I want is kind of extra versions of sweaters that I've already knit. I did take a look at Siri, which is actually a cardigan pattern, but I modified it to knit a Siri pullover. I'll include the pattern picture on the screen, my project picture rather, on the screen. And I knit this out of the same yarn base, but obviously a very different colour. And I did think about that, but actually the thing that held me back was I've been making a conscious effort since the sort of middle of last year, end of last year, to try and focus on patterns that are a little bit more size inclusive. I am not a particularly small person. I have a bust measurement, as we've already discussed on this podcast, of about 44, 45 inches. And it's fair to say that the last few months have, kind of made that fluctuate a little bit. As part of that, I want to ensure that the patterns that I'm knitting, particularly the ones that I talk about here in the podcast, I'm not at the upper end of the sizing for that, because my body shape, my body measurements are fairly average. And as such, I want to ensure that anyone, whether they be bigger than me, significantly smaller than me, whatever shape and size you happen to be, I want to ensure that I'm talking about patterns here on the podcast that are pretty accessible in that sense. And I didn't want to be talking about my Siri pullover where I'm knitting the very largest size, because that just feels shitty, in all honesty. So instead of knitting that pattern, I did take a quick look, found some other options, and then this beauty from Melody Hoffman really jumped into my lap. So I am knitting it at a slightly different gauge. She has you knit, I believe it's DK or worsted weight yarn held together with a lace weight to make it kind of Aran or chunky. The recommended gauge that she works towards is 17 stitches over 4 inches. It is fair to say that my gauge is a little bit smaller than that, but I've spent so much time talking about it, I should probably just show off the sweater itself. So here you have it. This is the start of my tulip sweater. And as you can see, I've made a fair bit of headway. I have cast on at the top, I have separated for the sleeves, and now I'm just working on the body itself. And it probably won't surprise you to note that we have another folded neckband here, because this is what I've discovered. I just love this detail so much about all of the sweaters that have it. I actually modified my Siri originally, the other sweater that I knit with this yarn, to have a folded neckband, and it's one of the things that kind of set me off it in the first instance. So I decided to modify that here. That's the only modification I've made so far, and I am knitting away on this quite happily. The sizing for this sweater goes from about a 34 inch up to a 55 inch bust, which places me somewhere pretty firmly in the middle. That being said, because I am using slightly different yarn at a slightly different gauge, I am knitting a slightly different size. So I decided that I was going to do the thing and do a little bit of maths and just try and work out, based on the gauge that I was getting, what size I should be knitting in order for it to comfortably fit around my bust. So I looked at all of the different numbers. I looked at all of the different stitch counts that Melody has for when you get to the widest part of the bust. And based on the fact that her gauge was 17 stitches, and based on the fact that I was knitting something a bit closer to 21 stitches over 4 inches, I did a bit of maths and realised the stitch count that I needed to get closest to where I was the second largest size, which I believe is a 51 inch bust. And so I'm being slightly opaque in terms of numbers, just because this is a paid for pattern. I don't want to sit here and say, oh, it's this number of stitches for this. So I'm going to talk more generally. At some point, I may endeavour to try and explain how I did that. But in all honesty, as with a lot of the techniques and things that I do here, I am not an expert. There are so many people who do such an incredible job of filming and educating and showcasing exactly how you do all these different techniques, whether it be the neckband, whether it be using your stitch count to work out and gauge to work out the stitch count you should aim for the right size. I will endeavour to kind of point you in the direction of people who can explain it far better than I can. probably with far fewer words as well, which is probably best for all of us, but still, yes, so a little bit of maths suggested that it was a larger size, and as I say, the sense check that I had was just trying to look at stitch count and see how I get on. So I'm pretty confident that this is going to work, that it's going to fit me in the way that I want it to. In terms of the sweater itself, you'll have seen from the picture, it's a little bit cropped. I will probably knit it so it starts to kind of hit just on high hip. Sorry, high hip, mid hip, yes, high hip, words. And so that's kind of the length that I'm going for with this particular sweater. I am going to leave the sleeves to last and knit as long as I can with the yarn that I have, for I have 5 skeins. One of them has already been used up. I will come on to the helical knitting technique that I'm using momentarily. But yeah, one of the skeins has already been used up. I'm on to my second and my third skeins respectively, which are here. So that's them all caked up and pretty. And yeah, after that I have a further skein and a further skein. So I will knit as much as I can with the yarn that I have. If that means I end up doing little elbow length sleeves for it, then so be it. If I can get 3/4 length sleeves out of it, I will be delighted. It is very unlikely I'll get full length sleeves, but if I do, I will eat my hat. No, I won't eat a hat. I like my hats too much, but still very excited with this. The only other thing about this I wanted to draw your attention to at this stage is this little guy. This little guy is my progress keeper. It is a tiny little adorable cat, a little Japanese cat from my wonderful friend Hannah, who is the corner of craft. You know that she does progress keepers. You know that they're beaded and they're wonderful and awesome, and that you should endeavour to get some if you possibly can, and this floats your boat. So as ever, it is just there to keep my progress, to let me know where I started. I think this is from Tuesday evening maybe, so not a huge amount of work put into it this week, but hopefully more of it will be going on. As I mentioned, the only other thing I wanted to touch on was the helical knitting, or helical knitting, depending on your pronunciation. This is a technique that I've seen a few folks talk about. Essentially, it's a way of being able to alternate skeins, because hand-dyed yarn, particularly this kind of variegated hand-dyed yarn, you want to ensure that you are mixing it up so you're not going to get any harsh lines where you change from one skein to the next. And so yes, helical knitting, great technique, and one that, again, I'm not going to endeavour to explain. Instead, I will point you in the direction of tutorials that do it far better than I do. But essentially, it's a way of alternating your skeins on each row as you go round without having the kind of harsh line that you get where you are stopping at the same place on every row, picking up the other yarn, knitting around with that, and then picking up the other yarn. That's going to get you quite a harsh line down one side. Occasionally, you'll get a little bit of puckering on the side seam if that's where you've done it. Helical knitting does away with that altogether. Much simpler technique, and far harder to spot. So definitely one that gets my vote. Okay, moving on. Again, I'm going to stay sitting here because the light is okay, the other battery is not yet charged, and we're all having a good time, right? Right. Oh, I feel like the camp counsellor that's just a bit too enthusiastic for her own good, and no one's ever really properly behind them. Anywho, let's crack on. The second project that I want to show you is one that I'm pretty sure this was a birthday cast on. Yet again, it was something that cropped up on my Instagram feed, and I thought I shall drop everything and I shall work on that because I have self-control that is exemplary. Yes, indeed. So this is the wonderful Laurel pattern by the fabulous Anna Dervout, who is along avec Anna. I'll include her pattern picture on the screen for you to enjoy. And yeah, you're welcome. You're welcome. If you hadn't already seen this pattern, I assure you it will be one that I'm sure many of you will be dashing to go and cast on because it's beautiful, right? And it's the sort of pattern that's going to look so different and really kind of so personal depending on the yarn combination that you choose. Case in point, I decided to opt for stash yarns because, again, there is nothing like moving house to remind you of just quite how much yarn you have. and need to work your way through. So yeah, thanks for that. Good life choices. But I decided to use some stash yarn, certainly for the main body of the sweater, in the form of some more Madeline Tosh yarn that I had hanging around. So I will hold this up here for you to see. This is my Laurel jumper, or at least the part that I have completed so far. It's actually at a very similar stage to my tulip sweater, which is interesting. But yes, this is, oops, let me hold it up here so you can see it. The main colour that I'm using here is Madeline Tosh 80-10-10. It's their MCN fingering weight in the deep colourway. If I hold it back here, it might be a little bit more colour accurate. That's maybe a little bit better. And then the contrast colour is, as the pattern recommends, some Spin Cycle dyed in the wool yarn. This happens to be the Stay Out of the Forest colourway, which, if I find another skein here, you can see is a fairly majestic range of oranges and reds and golds and greens, and it is just truly rather spectacular. So this is my first time using Spin Cycle yarns in a project. I am conscious it is at the more expensive end of some of the yarns out there, but having seen how beautiful it was within this pattern, again, birthday cast on, treat to myself. So I purchased this from a Yarn Story, which is a local yarn store over in Bath. Sadly, not entirely local to me. I do have some great ones here within the London area, but a Yarn Story is a fabulous shop. Carmen, the owner, is someone I've met in person a couple of times. Really, really lovely individual and someone I'm incredibly happy to support. So definitely enjoyed getting a yarn from her. But yes, this is kind of where I'm at with it. So as you can see, it's colour work. There's no kind of extra magic that I'm doing to make the colours appear the way that they are and the beautiful shifting. That's all the work of the Spin Cycle yarns themselves. They shift from this gorgeous, oh, let me hold that there with my chin, fetching, this gorgeous kind of yellowy orange here at the top, all the way through almost a kind of sunset orangey pink, and then back towards more of a yellow orange down here. If I look at the specific cake that I'm knitting from, you can see that I've got a little bit more of that yellow orange to go, and then it's going to fade into that slightly more kind of green colour there in the centre. So I'm going to have a little bit of fun when it comes to matching the skeins, because obviously the way that these are dyed and worked up, there's no two that are exactly the same. I think looking at this one, eyeballing this one, this may be the better chance, but it's very difficult to tell in the skein what they're going to look like until they're caked up. So I'll probably start winding these in the very, very near future, and then start with the one that looks the most similar to the core of the cake that I'm knitting from at the moment. Hopefully that makes sense. I think you know what I mean, but it's all good. But yes, I am really enjoying working on this so far. Again, it's a really lovely and well-written pattern. The knitting is entirely my own and questionable sometimes, but there we go. And as you can see, I have just split for the sleeves, and I'm back onto the pattern just below it as well. So I'm really enjoying working on this. In terms of what I'm using to knit this, I am knitting it on my Chowgu needles. I didn't mention that for the tulip sweater. I'm so sorry. That was also on Chowgu needles. 1 second. Laurel sweater, 3.75 millimeters. So these are a US size 5. The tulip is a US size 6. There we go. Just bringing everyone up to speed. But yes, US size 5, 3.75 millimeter needles. I think I did the ribbing on either a 3.5 or a 3.25 millimeter needle. It would be either a US size 4s or 3s or 4s, I believe. But yeah, I am really pleased with how this is working up. In terms of sizing, I wanted this to be a little bit oversized, so I am knitting the 120 centimeter bust size, which is, Alexa, what's 120 centimeters in inches?
120 centimeters is about 47 inches.
Good, there we go, 47 inches, so I should have a little bit of air there. For everybody else whose Amazon echoes just went off. I'm really sorry. I only thought about that in hindsight. You're welcome. But yes, I'm knitting the 47-inch bust. It's going to give me a little bit of oversizedness and a little bit of ease to play with. But again, it's pretty similar to how the pattern is currently worked up and designed and displayed on the modelled shots as well. A quick check shows me that it is sized from just under 32 inches up to about 63 inches. So again, the sizing that this has as a pattern is really pretty positive. It's one I'm pretty happy with. But again, look, it's so pretty in terms of how it's knitting up. It makes me quite giddy. So clearly where I'm at right now is with both of these, I am on body slog territory. So I will be working through these in the coming days, and mostly I'm going to be picking cat hair off them because that seems to be how I spend a fairly significant portion of my life right now. Joys. But yes, there you have it, my Laurel pullover. I'm looking forward to spending a little bit more time working on this and hopefully have a bit of progress to show for you as well. So those are my works in progress. I think there are a couple of other things that I've worked on during my time away, but those are the main ones that I wanted to focus on, and hopefully it'll give me something to share with you in the coming weeks as well, because I think it's fair to say my actual time spent knitting at the moment is flighty. I think like many people at the moment, I am just picking up needles whenever I can, working on it whenever I have the wherewithal to do so, but also not being too hard on myself. And so again, hopefully the advent of the Blame Dunderknit Along will encourage you to spend the time that you choose to spend on your crafting and spend it with something that you are really, really enjoying. Moving along into vicarious knitting this week, and there are a couple of patterns that caught my eye over the last few months that I want to draw your attention to as well, in the hope that perhaps some of you will be inspired and enabled accordingly. The first of those patterns is one by another podcaster, and if you have not watched the Drunk Knitters podcast, I so very urge you to go and do so. Sophia is a wonderful individual. She has incredible insights, incredible things to share, but also is just a wonderful person to sit and watch. If you follow her over on Instagram, you'll also know that she gave birth to possibly the cutest child there has ever been. Absolutely adorable, seriously. And on top of all of that is a very talented knitting designer. And so her fast fashion sweater is one that caught my eye and just thought it's just beautiful. First and foremost, I'll include a pattern picture here. It's actually listed as a beginner sweater. So for any of those of you out there who decide as part of the Blame Dunderknit Along, you are going to conquer your first sweater, this would be a great choice for you. It's a really lovely shape. It's got a sort of nice cozy high neckline. It's got some really nice eyelets to bring some detail into the overall sweater itself. And it can be knit cropped, but also, hey, do you know what? If cropped is not for you, it is fine. The good thing about top-down sweaters, which this is you carry on going with the yarn that you have until you get it to a length that you feel comfortable with. And so if you want something that's a little bit more mid-hip, if you want something that's tunic length that covers your bum, perfect. You can just carry on with this, provided you have enough yarn, obviously, and get it to the length that you want it before you start with the ribbing. And it's a great pattern that allows you to customize just that. It's knit in a worsted weight yarn, so again, there's a lot of options and choices there for you. And all in all, a really fantastic pattern. In terms of sizing, again, I believe it's pretty inclusive. I think it goes from a 32 up to about a 64-inch bust, I believe. Let me double check that. 34 to a 62-inch bust, so a lot of sizing options there for you to choose from. Because it's worsted and because it's cropped, it could, if you choose to knit it cropped, use up a fairly small amount of yarn. Even with the largest sizes, you're talking about just over 1,000 meters of yarn, which, depending on the yarn that you have, could potentially be fairly cost efficient. Let's go with that as well. So again, a great one to look at if you're looking to tackle a jumper as part of your Blame Dunderknit Along projects. So fantastic sweater there, the Fast Fashion Sweater by Sophia Talley of The Drunk Knitter. The second pattern I wanted to draw your attention to is a free hat pattern. Indeed, this designer has a series of free hat patterns and they are all absolutely beautiful. We in the Northern Hemisphere are coming up to the coldest time of the year. The nights they are drawing in, the days they are getting that little bit chillier, and so hats are very much on the order of care for the next few weeks, and this is a great example. This is the Trail 4 hat, and it's a hat by Claire Borchard, who is Autumn and Indigo. She is someone who I've kind of seen her patterns in passing, but I haven't actually followed her on Instagram, and spotted this and just thought, oh, I really like it. Now, it's very simple as hat patterns go, and what her hat patterns all have in common is they're fairly simple, but they're all incredibly elegant and just look really kind of polished and beautiful. And so this is one where if you want to try out the folded over neckband for the first time, this pattern allows you to do it. It's not knit in ribbing, it's just knit completely knit in the round. And so what you would do is you cast on your number of stitches, you knit for a while, you get to a point where you're happy with the kind of depth of the brim when it's folded in half. So you've got the wrong sides together from your starting edge here, and then the edge where your needles are here, you fold those together. You're happy with the sort of depth of the brim that that gives you. And then what you would do, and the pattern guides you to do this, is the next row that you knit, you're knitting both the current stitch on your needle with the corresponding stitch of the cast on to be able to create this lovely kind of dense, squishy double brim. And that's going to keep you nice and cozy. It's going to stay on well around your ears without leaving you with any of the telltale ribbing signs ingrained in your forehead, which is usually what I end up with during hat season. So with that in mind, this is definitely something I'm going to be looking to cast on in the next few weeks because it just looks like such a great hat pattern. Pom-pom optional. I mean, we all know that pom-poms are rarely optional. They are compulsory and obligatory with anything as in day-to-day life. But if you're not a pom-pom person, I respect that entirely. You do not have to choose to add one here, but it would look very good with a pom-pom. I'm just saying. It's also a fairly quick knit as it is DK yarn held together not only with a bit of lace weight yarn, mohair. I would say that's possibly optional, to be honest. If you don't want to add the mohair, I don't think you have to. But what it is the DK weight yarn is held doubled. So what it's going to give you is a really nice thick and chunky hat that's going to be pretty quick to knit. So if for the Blame Dungeon Along you do decide that you want to knit some gift knits because that's what's going to bring you joy, 1, you're a much nicer person than I am, and 2, fair play to you. Off you go. This would be a great pattern for you to look at there. So DK weight yarn held double to form a kind of chunky weight with the optional lace weight mohair as well to give that lovely kind of mottled effect. Definitely a lovely pattern to look at, and best of all, it is free of charge. So a great one to look at if you're in the market for a hat pattern. And last but not least is a pattern that has not yet been published, but trust me when I say I am properly stalking her Instagram for the day that this is released. Yes, my love affair with all things by Sari Nordland continues. That is something that has not gone away over the last few months. And when she published this pattern picture here, I'll include it on the screen, of her Sawyer jumper, I mean, just, can we take a minute? Seriously though, just there is something about Sari Nordland's aesthetic that absolutely speaks to and appeals to me. Everything she comes out with, everything that she knits is polished and beautiful and just incredibly unfussy. And it's exactly my aesthetic. I know everyone out there will have different opinions, different preferences. This is just something that speaks to me personally. So as soon as I saw this, I thought, I will save that in my favourites and I will wait for it to be released. I'm not entirely sure I'm going to cast it on the second it comes out because, you know, we've got some other things on the needles at the moment, but I'll definitely be keeping an eye on it there. There's not much that I've got to go on at the moment, aside from the fact she did say in another post that it was knit in hedgehog fibres. They have a new tweedy base, which is a kind of grey base with different flecks of colours of tweed in there as well. So yeah, again, if you want to replicate it, might be worth keeping an eye on some of those updates, but I'll keep you posted as to when that pattern is published. In the meantime, as I say, I just go and ogle her Instagram feed because it's full of things that I just think are really pretty. And then this is the point in the coming weeks when I will be showcasing some of your wonderful Blame Dunderknit Along efforts. So I'm really, really looking forward to sharing those with you all as ever. And as I've mentioned previously in the podcast, you can post those over on Instagram using the Blame Dunderknit Along hashtag, which I'll include on the screen. Similarly, you can head over to the chatter thread in Ravelry and post pictures there. I'll be taking a selection from each for each episode coming up and including them here to hopefully just highlight your amazing work, but also use it as an opportunity to inspire others who might seek to cast on something very similar. That's pretty much it for the knitting content. I thank you so much for bearing with me through the, kind of setup changes and moving things halfway through. I genuinely feel like I'm starting out with this all for the first time all over again. I know it probably felt a little bit jarring going from one to the other, but I wanted to make sure that I committed to getting the podcast done, getting it out there and not procrastinating any further because I owe it that much. I owe that much to you to get this out and try and get back to more of a regular schedule. And to that end, to everyone who sent lovely messages and just kind of checked in with me while I was away, I really, really do appreciate it. I mentioned up front that obviously there were a few things that kept me from coming back. The main one of those, though, I did post about briefly over on Instagram. The wonderful and just general kitty delight that is my fabulous cat Hobbs. He is absolutely fine now, but we had a bit of a health scare with him just over a month ago where I took him to the vet thinking that he had some problems with his teeth. He'd been off his food a little bit recently and I wasn't completely sure what was going on. It was very kind of similar behaviour to when he had some teeth taken out a few years ago. We actually discovered that he is diabetic. He had been obviously kind of super hungry and really, really desperate to get food, but not actually able to process that and get the nutrients that he needed from the food that he was eating. And so as such, just, was feeling really weak and quite lethargic. And the guilt that you feel as a pet owner when you suddenly have this revealed to you is fairly extreme. Parents, I don't know how you put up with it. For me, just finding out about the cat was more than enough. But yes, it was a fairly kind of stark couple of weeks. So the good news is he is much better now. I am a fairly dab hand at giving him his twice daily insulin injections that will need to continue throughout the rest of his life. But if it's what he needs, I am absolutely happy and here to give it to him because he's an awesome fucking cat. I love him to bits. And so, yeah, I will no doubt find a little bit of footage from him. He was playing around on the yarn shelves earlier, so I'll make sure that I include that footage towards the end here. But yeah, he's absolutely fine now. It just took me a little while to kind of calm down from that, get him settled. We've been back to the vet a few times. I've got a few more appointments still to go. It is possible that I'm going to need to monitor his blood glucose levels going forward and adjust his dose accordingly. But at the moment, he seems to be on a fairly good, even keel, which is great. But yes, thank you so much to everybody who reached out, who gave me suggestions, encouragement, recommendations around that. Again, I really, really do appreciate it. But yes, I've been here a couple of months now, settled in very nicely with my fella. And so I look forward to kind of coming back on a more regular schedule and bringing you some of that amazing Blame Dunderknit Along content that I think we're all very much here for. So in the meantime, I really do hope that you're keeping and staying well, that you're coping as best you can under the current circumstances. And I look forward to speaking with you very soon. So have a wonderful rest of day, rest of week. I hope your knitting is keeping you happy and fulfilled, and that if you don't have a chance to knit fully, then at least you have a chance to knit vicariously. Keep on keeping on, and I will speak to you again very soon. Bye, Pickles. Alright, nothing like a camera dying halfway through to make you change all your plans. This is fine, this is super. We're gonna go with this. And I'm gonna show off my boobs on the internet. Again, because it's kind of my thing, it's fine. Don't worry about it. Boobs! Okay, the lighting here is deeply strange. What are we doing here? Oh, I'm a ghost. Oh, Halloween appropriate. Okay, we're going to see if we can make this setup work going forward, but if anyone's got any strong, really strong feelings about wanting to be in the stash room, let me just show you what I mean when I say it's a little bit cramped. So when I said it was a little bit cramped, I mean this is the space that we're talking about here. It's fairly little. If I just, I've already knocked things off. So as I say, good news is stash wall's still here. Stash wall's fine, not a problem at all. It's all good. But yeah, it's not the biggest of spaces. Not the biggest of spaces. So this is where I work during the day. I sit here and scribble on post-it notes, as you can probably see. But yeah, I've then got some general detritus. My favourite army name. But yeah, it's not the biggest of spaces. So you know, if I back out gently, it's fairly intimate.